Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be talking about something I'm very excited to be talking about for once, and that's The Witcher, the first book in the Witcher series, because, well, we've done January now. This is all coming out in the first week of February, but I did read this in January as part of Elliot Brooks's Witcher read-along. For me, this is a reread, so I'm very excited to be talking about it, because I've got a bit of a different perspective to a lot of you who I know are just coming across this for the first time. This is the first book in the Witcher series. It's called The Last Wish, as you can see. It is by an author whose name I can't pronounce correctly, so just read it and work it out for yourself. It's in big letters right there. So what is this book about? It is about a guy called Geralt of Rivia. That is a informal title that he gave himself because he's just cool like that. He is Geralt. He is a Witcher, which in this world means that he is a mutant who has been taken in as a child and trained from, basically from being a young boy in order to hunt monsters, because this world is a world full of magic and monsters, and normal people tend to get eaten by them because Gribblies and peasants don't mix very well. So Geralt is here. His job is to wander the land and take contracts to slaughter evil monsters. But as we learn throughout the book, not all things that are beastly are monsters, and not all things that are human are necessarily not monsters. Very interesting. So yes, this is the first book in the long-running series, which obviously is now finished. I think it was all written in the 90s. So this book is the first book in the series, and it's a collection of short stories, actually, which is a unique way to start off a long fantasy series. I think it's a superb choice because it really does give you the opportunity to really delve in to the characters and the world building. You get these small bursts of basically monster of the week stories. Each story follows Geralt as he takes on a different contract or comes into conflict with different groups. Not all of the stories are about him fighting a monster. All of the stories, I think, have him fighting in them, but not all of them are about him fighting a monster. In the traditional sense, anyway. It's all held together by this really good framing device, which is essentially a bonus story, which is called The Voice of Reason. In between each story, it cuts back to this, so it's The Voice of Reason Part 1, and so on and so on. And that tells the story of Geralt sort of just interacting with the world at large. I think that's the only one, actually, that doesn't have him fighting anyone, which is interesting. But yeah, it's really well written. It's a translation from Polish, and from what I understand from people that have reviewed the Polish version, the writing style is nicer in Polish than it is in English, because the translation loses some of that sort of poetry, I guess. But I think it's, writing style aside, I think it's really well done. Like, each story is really well done on its own. I would happily reread any of them. The pacing of the book is great. It's very short, as you can see, but it really does. It cuts out all of that fat that bugs me about other books. Like, we were talking about Dune last week, and that had loads of this really annoying padding in there. This book has obviously no padding at all. It really gets to the point very quickly, which really helps when being introduced to this world for the first time, because it's not all about all of the grand conspiracies and all of this huge country-altering, world-altering events. Like, none of that's in here. It's very much about the character of Geralt, his philosophy, his politics, and the philosophy and politics of the small level people that he interacts with. Like, this isn't a story about an epic hero saving the world. It's a story about a man walking about doing jobs because that's what he does. That's how he makes money. And a lot of the time, things are not as clear cut as they seem at first glance. You might start the story thinking, okay, well, I get where this is going. This is pretty straightforward, and then it switches on you, and then you think, oh, am I a horrible person for wanting Geralt to just slay the monster? And that's sort of a really interesting way of having a hero like this, because he's not really a hero. He gets to be a hero almost by accident a lot of the time. You would see him as a hero if he came along as like, he's the, like, essentially it talks a lot about like, oh, brave knights will fight the monster, and these are all stories that Geralt sort of turns his nose up at, and is like, you know, brave knights in shining armor that don't know what they're doing are just going to get eaten by the Gribbly. It's not going to work out for them. You need a professional, and sometimes professionals at their job are not the dashing heroes that you want them to be. This is true of all the characters. Yennefer of Vengerberg is Geralt's love interest throughout the saga, but she's introduced towards the end of this, and she's not a good person, guys. She's not a good person. A lot of the characters in this book are not on the surface very good people until you get to know them and get in depth with them, and that's great because you don't get this really tropey, oh, like, you know, oh, we've got the wise wizard, because like there's a wizard in this and he's a piece of shit, and you've got Geralt and he's like the brave swordsman, but he's not bothered about doing brave swordsmanship. He'll do it if you've got enough money, but there are some things where he does draw the line. He's like, that's not, you know, that's not my job to do that. You've got the wrong end of the stick. And there are queens and kings that try and manipulate him, and he's like, I'm not about that, mate. I'm not about that. Just fuck off. And that's great. Loads of great characters. It's very fun. Like, there's so much dark comedy involved in this. There's parts where Geralt and his friend Dandelion are trying to catch a fish, which is just a brilliant introduction to a story. So yeah, that's really all I can say. Is it's fantastic. It's a 5-star read for me. I really loved it the first time. I read it on audiobook, and I'm glad I'm not doing the audiobook thing for this time, because the audiobook, the narrator's great. Like, he puts in a load of effort for all doing the characters' voices, but for some reason he made Geralt like a Yorkshireman. Like, so imagine Sean Bean. He's like, "You're right, Dandelion." Like, it's really, I don't know. It's a weird, that's a terrible accent, and it's really hard to describe. But the audiobook is, it's something. But yeah, I highly recommend reading this. I'm going to be doing another video on Wednesday with discussion points for each individual story. So if you have read this, feel free to watch that and join the discussion. If you haven't read this, well, go out and buy it and read it, or read it however you want. You don't have to buy it, I suppose, but if you want to read it, go ahead and read it, and join us for the discussion, and maybe even join us for the rest of the Witcher read-along. I certainly will be. The next book is another short story collection, and it's probably actually got some of my favourite and most heartbreaking stories of all time. So looking forward to that, and I will see you next time. Bye.